Hi, I'm Jody Daniels, CEO and privacy consultant at Red Clover Advisors.
And this is Jan Rosenfeld, Head of Solutions Engineering at iVerify, and you're listening to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Firewalls Don't Stop Dragons. I am your host, Kerry Parker, and today we have episode 482 for May 25th, 2026. Man, this month is almost over. Time is just flying. We're almost at the halfway mark for the year. Man, I know I make comments like that all the time, but honestly, as I'm recording this, it still stuns me. when I look at these dates, like, oh my God, really? Is that the date? Oh, time is flying. Okay, anyway, we've got a great show for you today. A really interesting panel discussion with Jody Daniels and Dan Rosenfeld, who bring two unique perspectives to this topic. And I forget where I decided I was going to do this, but I've talked about surveillance in so many different ways, but I think I was covering one of the stories several months ago, and I realized that I'd never really done a focused story on surveillance of employees. In other words, by their employers. And it's kind of a thorny thing. We've talked about surveillance of students, which is in its own way different from just kind of general mass surveillance. And same thing with employers and employees, because there's a whole different expectation of privacy. In fact, it's basically nil when you're working for a company and using their equipment on their time and on their facilities. But that doesn't mean that there's not things that we shouldn't understand about what's going on there, so we can still protect ourselves. And this interview did not disappoint. We covered some really interesting concepts here today, and I think you're going to find it very informative. So before we get into that, just a little bit of quick lingo for you. We talk about EDR, that stands for Endpoint Detection and Response. It's kind of a security thing that companies often put on their computing devices, not necessarily just laptops, sometimes servers and things as well, that monitors those devices and looks for intrusion and looks for weird activity, for red flag kind of activity. The idea being that you want to kind of notice that something looks fishy before maybe malware or something has really had a chance to get up to a lot of no good. We talk about IP, and in this case, it's not Internet Protocol, it's intellectual property. We talk about the CCPA, which of course is the California Consumer Privacy Act. We talk about PII, or personally identifiable information. And then finally, somebody, I forget, makes a reference to the Wi-Fi pineapple or pineapple Wi-Fi. That sounds like an odd set of words to put together, and it is on purpose. It's actually a pen testing or a penetration testing device for Wi-Fi systems. And it looks like a router, but it's got all sorts of security attack stuff built into it, which can be used by good guys and bad guys. It's just a tool. But it might surprise you that there's these sorts of things out there. If you've never gone to the site Hack5, which is HAK5, you should check out the kinds of things that are there. You might be kind of shocked, actually. So I'll put a link to the Wi-Fi pineapple in the show notes just as an example. But while you're there, poke around and see what other kind of devices are for sale. Perfectly legally to anybody looking to do some security penetration testing or get up to some mischief. So anyway, let's get to our very informative interview with Jody and Jan. Jody's the founder and CEO of Red Clover Advisors, a boutique data privacy consultancy and one of the few certified women's business enterprises focused solely on privacy. Jody is a certified information privacy professional with over 20 years of experience helping a range of businesses in privacy, marketing, strategy, and finance roles. Welcome back, Jody.
I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Jan is a 15-plus year IT and security infrastructure leader. He started his career with the federal government, handling endpoint security, digital forensics, and mobile. From there, he moved into MDM solutions engineering at Conji, and he currently works as a solutions engineer at iVerify, tackling all things mobile cybersecurity. Welcome, Jan.
Thanks so much for having me.
All right, guys. So I've been wanting to talk about this subject for a long time. Before we get too deep into this, we're going to be talking today about employer on employee surveillance. And I just want to stipulate before we get started that obviously employers need to protect their intellectual property. They need to protect their physical property. They also have responsibility to guard the safety of their employees. I get that and I understand that. They also have, legal record keeping responsibilities as well, certainly depending on your industry, some more than others. But This also puts them in a position to collect a lot of very personal information, which could be used for other purposes and potentially to our detriment. So given that there is some reason for this, I want to talk about some of the ways in which, as an employee, this might be a problem. But let's start by talking about the ostensible reasons for why all this monitoring and data gathering. What sorts of legitimate threats and problems are companies trying to avoid by keeping tabs on their employees and the devices that they use for work? And are these problems more often the result of honest mistakes by otherwise faithful employees or malicious intent?
Well, I can start with this one. And I think I would echo what you really started with, which is companies need to protect their data.
Yeah.
That might be confidential data, that might be personal data, and that is their obligation. And in terms of, is it honest mistakes or malicious intent? I think it's actually potentially both. And we have to really address both of those. So if we sort of take the honest mistake one, it's understanding, did employees, are they trying to go to websites that might jeopardize information? Maybe they're not secure websites. Are they downloading software? Are they engaging in tasks that aren't going to be safe for the company? Again, whether that be from a personal information standpoint, but also from a confidential standpoint, right? If I go somewhere and I can share and gather all kinds of information. So understanding what people are doing and trying to have a monitoring approach to set policies that a company has kind of makes some sense. It's why there are rules, and typically even in regular policies, people will say, well, I need to monitor, I need to test, is my policy even working? If you take it outside the context of privacy, think about quality assurance. People have some form of quality assurance on, is what we said supposed to happen actually happening in any product? Anyone get like a little QA sticker on your clothing, right? That's where that comes from. So it's the same idea here. But then we also have malicious intent. And there are employees who are trying to take information and who are trying to steal. We see this in finance. Why are there a variety of financial controls? So that Susie can't go and steal all the information. And if Susie does and tries to take and steal all the money, there's a path that we can go and either, hopefully we would have stopped it if we didn't do a good job stopping it. Now we can catch. The same is going to be true over here in terms of malicious intent. So if there is someone who is trying to export all of our personal information, steal all of our customer lists, inject some type of code, we can capture that. We can see that. And sometimes the idea of cameras and the idea of monitoring and the idea of surveilling is enough of a deterrent for, one, malicious actors, and two, making people think, oh, well, wait, I really have to make sure I'm doing what it is I'm supposed to be doing. So in my view, those are some of the actual real reasons why companies might put this in place.
Yeah, I'm going to preface my answer in saying I'm probably the closest person on this call to being the guy on the other side who's doing the monitoring, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on who you ask. I think that the answer to this question really falls into two legitimate buckets. The first bucket is legitimate cybersecurity, right? EDR tools, monitoring tools, they monitor employee, let's call it activity. And it's really not employee activity. It's really processes and things that are happening on endpoints, things like that. And they monitor those things in order to detect and protect from legitimate cybersecurity attacks, right? Things that are affecting, anomalies in the endpoint, right? In the mobile industry, we call it anomalies because the device is supposed to behave a certain way. And if it looks something like a different way, we have a problem. But the same principle applies to, any sort of endpoint. So that's sort of the one legitimate side is cybersecurity. The other side, as Jody mentioned, is information, right? IP, data theft, that sort of thing. And that's a very legitimate cause, right? I mean, a company's IP is the company at the end of the day, right? Their customer list, their the data they keep and their products they build and all that stuff. And they don't want that getting out for whatever reason. And so, that's where you get into sort of the threat is internal. I look at it as one side of this with cybersecurity, the threat is external.
Sure.
People protect my people. The other side that's legitimate is the threat is internal. And I want to make sure that my data stays inside the bucket where it's supposed to be. In order to do that, to some extent, I have to monitor what's happening in my environment.
And again, as I was pointing out, as an employer, it's their equipment, it's their intellectual property. They have rights to that. I understand why they want to protect those things. And so I want to make sure we say up front that I understand that the motivations behind this. What I'm worried about, and Jody, you alluded to this, is that we've got if this is going to be a deterrent, for anything to be a deterrent, then the people need to know about it, right? And I think this is going to be a thread throughout what we talk about today. I'm worried that a lot of employees aren't aware, that they don't know the extent to which their employer may be able to get this information. And for whatever ostensible reason, it can be because people are human beings with flaws. They can be exploited by rogue IT employees, or if it's there to be captured, perhaps by somebody stealing this information, somebody hacking into the company and taking that information that was otherwise kept for legitimate purposes. So I want to keep these things both in our heads at the same time as we go through this today. All right. So as an employee, Jody, what should be my expectation of privacy when I'm in the office or when I'm using company equipment? Am I protected by just regular privacy laws that a regular human being would? Or do I abrogate some of my rights when I, for instance, sign my employment contract? Probably buried somewhere in there is I probably gave permission for them to look at this stuff. Can information gathered for security purposes also be used for non-security purposes, like, for example, performance evaluations?
So let's first tackle the expectation of privacy, and especially on company equipment using company software as well. And I am the consultant, not the attorney, but I get to use the "it depends" answer because it does truly depend on jurisdiction. And appreciating you have a global audience.
Yep.
In the US, it is state by state. And then globally, it's going to depend also where you are, but each jurisdiction is going to be a little bit different. Globally, employees tend to have a little bit more privacy rights compared to those in the US. So in the US right now, we have, as of this recording, we have 20 signed privacy laws. We have a new one that has been passed but not signed yet. So we're getting close. But out of all of those, California is the only one with a comprehensive privacy law that actually includes employees. But the other thing, especially in the States as well as globally, is you have a variety of HR laws of what kind of information can be collected and how it can be used. And those two things intersect. So in terms of an expectation of privacy, traditionally, it is company equipment, it is company software. Mm-hmm. The expectation of privacy when you are performing company functions, it is not fully closed book. It is the company's information, and traditionally companies have a right, as Jan just described, from a security standpoint, as well as some others, to be able to monitor and understand what is actually happening with that data.
Right.
So it is not quite the same as if this was, your own personal device, especially when you're engaging in companies, which means that information is communicated in a couple places. I live in Atlanta, Georgia. Where I work in Georgia, I don't have dedicated privacy rights. I have different HR obligations that a company would have to communicate with me. And those fall in internal policies. That's why we have employee handbooks. And sometimes you have a contract. So it all kind of depends on the type of role you are and where you are in terms of where that's going to be. The level of clarity is also going to be a little bit different. And even in California, the kind of notice you're receiving as an employee under CCPA is still a little bit different than what might show up in an employee handbook and how that information might be collected and processed and used from a security lens. So they're still a little bit different. And then globally, GDPR, using that one as an example, completely covers employees. Many other jurisdictions model off of that one. And that is more friendly to the employee, but it doesn't strip away all of an employer's rights as well to protect its information. So there's a balance, more of a balance that employers have to manage when you start leaving the United States, but it's not 100% employee. There are rights, but again, there's an interesting balance, and what companies really have to figure out is exactly what they're collecting, what they're using it for. Compared to other jurisdictions like here in the United States, CCPA is more forgiving. You have more opportunity to collect and use the data just because of where it is. But those employees have more rights to understand what is happening, and maybe they might be able to have that data deleted. But again, it's very or accessed, very particular in what it is. So it's exception driven. And what I would add is, in terms of, can I use information from a security lens for non-security purposes? Traditionally, I would lean towards no, but there's an exception, because if there is malicious intent, or if I am monitoring let's say, am I actually logging on and performing work? And we have monitoring tools that determine you're not, or you're supposed to be in the office, or you're supposed to only be remote X amount of time and you're not. That does come into performance evaluations. So I think there's a little bit of a gray zone in terms of what are you monitoring for? And then that could be used for that extended purpose. So there are companies who monitor via VPN usage how much you're working remote, but that is communicated. We are monitoring that. Well, why are we monitoring that? Because our expectation is you are working this amount of hours. If you're not, then that's going to be a more direct connection. If I were to take that monitoring and try and figure out, I don't know, who you are or what else interesting is about you, and I think you might be great for this role, that is probably something that you could not put together. So that ties to where I said not really, or you would make them different. But again, in my example, they would be similar and you were collecting it for a particular purpose, and that purpose might lend itself beyond just security.
All right. So we have a very practical question here, and I like to be practical where I can. As an employee, especially this was a big deal since COVID, if I'm working from home, particularly if I'm working remotely, let's say in a different state from the headquarters of my company, which laws apply?
So first, your employee privacy rights follow where you, the employee, live. However, where the company is based also has to adhere to any laws there as well. So
it's a hybrid.
It might be a hybrid, but traditionally, I said I'm in Atlanta, Georgia. So any employer has to follow Georgia HR laws, Georgia business laws, Georgia privacy laws. But my company might be based in California.
Right.
And so it might have something else that employers have to do that may or may not be the same as a state. So it just traditionally, it is based on where the person is located for sure. So in other words, if the company was based in Georgia, but the person was in California, the company has to adhere to the California laws because it's based on where the person is. It might also have extra things that it has to do just as an employer.
Sure.
So traditionally, net, based on where the person is. And that is true for all things privacy, customers and prospects as well. It follows the person. But now you start getting into HR, and that's just a whole nother ballgame.
Okay. All right. So I want to talk about some of the technical ways this is done, because I don't think a lot of people understand the way that we don't understand technology in general, but there's some really weird stuff when we start getting into, company security tools. So let's start with mobile devices. Like in the old days, and I'm old enough to remember this. If you were an employee, like a salesperson, and you needed a cell phone, the company would often provide you a cell phone. And so at that point, it's company equipment, and you might think, okay, that's a clear line. But today, that's not true. Now there's this BYOD phenomenon, right? That's bring your own device. Everyone's already got a mobile phone. So instead of carrying around two mobile phones, companies are smart enough to realize, okay, let's just have you use the one, but let's maybe doctor up that phone a little bit, because it's now that you're going to be running company apps or doing company communications on that device, then we need to have some say about what goes on there. So by mixing company communications and data with personal stuff, this exposes the company to risks. It also probably exposes you to some risks. So how do companies address this threat from the company perspective? Jan, what technical tools do they employ, and how do they work? How do my audience understand what's going on?
I'll preface this answer by saying I could talk about this for three days straight, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's quite a lot here, but for the sake of this conversation, I want to simplify it. So first of all, corporate-owned devices very much still a thing, right? Companies are definitely still issuing company equipment in both the form of a computer, a mobile device, whatever. But you're absolutely right. BYOD is growing. Companies see it as an enormous cost center to buy hardware for people, and not having to buy hardware for people is very attractive, right? So the rise of BYOD is very much so a real thing, and every company in the world, every security company in the world is trying to tackle how do we solve this problem.
Yeah.
Traditionally, this problem is solved. Let's actually say currently. Currently, this problem is solved with really two technologies. One is MDM, mobile device management, and sort of an adjacent thing to that would be MAM, mobile application management. So am I managing the device itself in some way, shape, or form? Or am I only managing the containerized applications that contain company data, and I don't care about the rest of the device? Now, Starting with MDM, so the device management side. This is what I meant when I said traditional, because for 20 years, we've had some form of device management for both mobile devices, computers, whatever it is. This is generally pretty invasive, right? Again, I'm speaking generalities. Any MDM experts out there can call me on it. But if you enroll a device, no matter what device, in MDM, your employer can wipe your device clean. Right? Now, there is a ton of nuance to that. It depends how you enroll the device. If you enroll it as a user, if you enroll it as a device first enrollment, there's all these little nuances when it comes to MDM. But traditionally, that was the deal. Hey, if you want to use your device, fine. You have to enroll it in this device management service. And with that device management, we can see a lot of stuff about your device. On mobile, the biggest scare for the end user is, hey, they could wipe pictures of my kids, right? They could wipe the whole device if I get infected or whatever it is. The other side of what I talked about was MAM. This is a little more modern, and this is where the company says, I don't care what you do on your device. You can do whatever you want. I only care about the containerized data within, the Microsoft apps, right? Okay. So, Outlook, SharePoint, whatever. That data is hosted in some sort of, data center, cloud, on-prem, wherever, right? The company owns that data, and they give users access to it via a variety of managed conditions. They say, okay, well, you got to keep your phone at least sort of up to date. Your phone has to not be compromised by the Russian government. I don't know. And if all that's good, we'll deploy these containers to your device, and you can access company data in this siloed, managed partition, right? Now, there's going to be a ton of nuance here with what platform you're on. If you're on an iPhone versus on Android, and I can totally get into that later, but that's generally the two schools of thought. Now, maybe something your users might not, our listeners rather might not be aware of is this sort of war for how do we manage this data is the biggest topic in cybersecurity. It's there's 400 companies fighting for 10 different ways to how to do this, right? How do we do this safely? We call it enabling BYOD. We say, how do we enable our population to bring their own phones, which we have no idea what's on those phones. Right. Those phones could be anything. Yeah. Those phones could be literally you could have a virus on your phone, right? We don't know because it's your phone. But we want to give you, how do we give you safe access to company resources so you can do your job with that device? So this is an enormous topic, and every vendor in the world wants to solve it in their own way, right?
So, all right, 2 follow-up questions. First of all, as an employee, how do I know this is happening? Do they send me an email and I click a link and it just happens? Do I have to go into the IT department and I hand them my phone, and when they hand it back, it's in some new condition? And second of all, I assume that there has to be some sort of coordination with, let's say, Apple and Google and Microsoft when we eventually talk about computers. The OS vendors must be helping enable these sorts of things as well, yes?
Absolutely. So the OS vendors, the OEMs, if you want to call them, they create frameworks by which these processes can be built upon. So Apple has, the MDM framework. Android sort of has the Work framework. They call it the Work OS framework. And you build systems of control based on these predefined frameworks. Now, you asked earlier, how do I know as an employee? Well, if it's MDM, you're going to know, right? Because you either have to choose to install the profile. You sign in with your corporate email. You say, hey, is it okay that I install this profile? This is what the profile can do. It can delete data on my phone. It can, whatever. So you're going to consent to that as a part of, I want to use my own device. MAM, when you're managing just the applications, it's a little more esoteric. The company's going to say, hey, go download Microsoft Outlook. You try to download it. You try to sign in. It goes, hey, your company is managing the data inside of this app, and you got to meet these requirements. So you're going to know. It's a little less invasive, but you're going to know. Right? You will have some sort of notification that your phone is being protected, monitored, whatever. And I'm pretty sure, and I'm of course, I'm not the lawyer here, but I'm pretty sure they have to do that, right? They can't silently install that kind of stuff on your phone. Like Apple, Google won't allow that to happen on their OS. So you will be notified in some way, shape, or form. And for anyone listening, you can always check if your device is managed by going to, as an example, settings, VPN device management, and seeing if there are any profiles on your phone.
All right. Well, you teed up Jody perfectly for this next question, which is, all right, so what sorts of personal information might be gleaned by using these tools? I mean, obviously they're there again, ostensibly for these security reasons, and I understand that, but that also means that your company now has a presence on your phone. We're talking phones first. So help me understand, what are some of the privacy risks personally for this? And then if I leave the company and I remove these tools, is there any lingering effect?
Right. Well, I really actually want to hear Jan's comments on this because as someone who is implementing these all day long, you have some really great insight to these. Traditionally, my understanding has always been that they are not seeing every single activity that is happening.
That's
and
correct.
The concern is you can read all my text messages, you can see all of my pictures. Employers don't want that information. No one wants that. All they care about is, are you doing things that I don't want you to be doing? And can I stop you? Can I block you? Or, unfortunately, can I take action if you did any of those things? But no company wants to ingest all of that personal information. But Jan, so my question kind of to you, if I may, is, there are things like IP address though, or the types of sites and URLs that I've gone to. And so I have seen tools where I can tell some of that information. And maybe you can offer a little bit more in terms of that level of granularity, because it's not so much the name and the email and the text and the phone numbers. It's this other kind of browser device information that in privacy universes can now be personal information. And let me pass that back to you.
I mean, you nailed it, right? So I'm going to talk in the context of mobile here, but mobile is generally more when you're talking about a computer, pretty much everything is on the table, and I know we'll get to that, but mobile is generally more structured, right? These are closed systems for the most part, like, Google systems and Apple systems and things like that. When you enroll your device into some sort of management, your employer does not really have access to see your text message. Those are encrypted, right? Those are in their own enclave on the device. Your photos as well. Like there's not, at least to my knowledge, no legitimate software that can see anything in that user space by design, right? You're not supposed to. What you do have access to is the ability to control the device in ways that might be detrimental to the user, right? Cut off access to using certain things, like using the camera, using the microphone, obviously wipe data. That's the big one, right? That's why we're so sensitive about BYOD. Jody, you are absolutely correct about the network stuff. So IP addresses, identifying information based on network information, location information, that is on the table because that can be seen through tools like VPNs, right? Network monitoring tools. If you're in that like zero trust world, products like Zscaler and stuff, they can all see this stuff. Now, you hit the nail on the head one more time with they don't care, right? As the person on the other end of that, ingesting that information would be insane. Like the amount of data coming through the 30,000 devices, it doesn't mean anything inherently to me. It's tens of thousands of IP addresses that I'm going to sit there and cross-correlate that and find out that my user was at a Starbucks? Like, no, I'm not going to do that, especially on a BYOD device. Now, there is a world in which that network information is monitored, but it's sort of not in the way that the average user might think. We're not so much concerned with, oh, hey, Carrie went to Starbucks. Like, who cares, right? What we are concerned is, oh, you joined an insecure network at a Starbucks and your device is now open to cyber attacks. Right. And that's where the security tools come in to cut you off at that layer that says, well, we just don't want you to be allowed to get on an insecure, Pineapple Wi-Fi network or something like that. Right. So that's sort of the, I guess I'd call it the real world side of monitoring. And I kind of want to address this because I know there's always like a tinfoil hat in the crowd, right? Like, is there a company out there that is monitoring in the bad way? Right. Of course. Of course.
Well, let me put it this way, though. It doesn't have to even be malicious, right? It doesn't have to be a nosy company. If they're not doing it in real time, fine. I understand that. It's too big of a haystack to be looking at this stuff constantly in real time. But if they're saving this data, and at some point somebody, a rogue employee or a hacker that breaks into the company or law enforcement comes and asks for this information, if it's recorded somewhere, that still means you could go back and pick out somebody and look at this information and glean privacy things from this.
Absolutely. Correlation, and we'll probably talk about this later, but correlation is an enormous part of cybersecurity. So taking all of these data points, including network stuff, including device stuff, including, that PII that you get just from enrolling your phone, right? Your phone number, your UUID, all that stuff. Correlating that to create a forensic timeline, it is very real, right? That is a real thing. And that does happen. Usually it only happens in a forensic investigation, after the fact, but it can happen. And so I want to sort of validate people's concerns that it's like, oh, could you go back and build a case or a story from this? Of course. Absolutely. So I just want to stress it's probably not being done every day because that would be an enormous lift for any company. In fact, an entire industry exists around, building forensic data from digital devices. But is it possible? Yes.
Well, and I want to take this opportunity to make an analogy to an authoritarian government, because it's the same kind of a situation where if we record everything all the time on everyone, we don't have to monitor all those things in real time. But if at any point in time I want to say, you know what, I don't like Carrie, I want to get rid of Carrie. Like, I want to fire him as an employee. I want to find a reason for that. Or as an authoritarian government, Carrie's doing some stuff I don't like anymore. Let's see if I can't go back and find something historical about him, where let me look at the flock cameras and figure out that he sped in his vehicle. I could find something. The classic line is Cardinal Richelieu, like, give me 6 lines from the most honest man and I will find something in there with which to hang him. Right. So if we've collected all the data, even if we're not doing it in real time, it does still open the possibility for some bad actor, and it doesn't have to be the company, to go back and make use of that somewhere.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right, so let's talk about computers. We've talked about mobile. Now let's talk about computers. Most companies provide their employees with a laptop these days. That's pretty common. I'll be curious to know, Jan, I can't imagine BYOD works the same way. Like, I can't imagine that most companies are cool with people bringing their own laptops to work. But that's a whole different thing. Mobile devices tend to be more locked down. They tend to be at the mercy of what the operating systems will allow them to do in terms of monitoring and things like that. But what sorts of monitoring, how's it different when we're talking about computers versus mobile phones, and how might they expose my personal data?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying BYOD for a computer is incredibly rare.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought.
You would have to be a very immature security organization to allow BYOD computers, right? For a number of reasons, but maybe the primary reason is when we get into the world of computers and endpoints, like, everything is on the table. There are no structured controls like there are on iOS or Android. There's not the concept of a walled garden when you get into computers. Once I get into computers, I can, just as an example, run scripts, right? Mm-hmm. Query information on the device and basically see and do whatever I want. Back in the government, we used to put up a policy banner whenever you signed into your computer. And in all caps, we said, you should have no reasonable expectation of privacy while using this device. No. And it was like in caps, and it was like, and we were informing the user,
which is great.
Right. We were effectively getting their consent through that policy banner that, okay, I agree, I'm going to use the computer now. Right. But, why would we say something so kind of scary like that? It's because we did have the capability to get just about anything. Right. Again, not that we would, because that would be an enormous lift on our end, but we could. Much more so, I can't run a script on a phone. That's not really a thing that happens. Not on an iPhone, at least. Not in the same meaningful way, right? So the first thing to know, I think, at a technical level about a computer is that we're 50 years into personal computing at this point. All data can be examined, monitored, started, stopped, extracted, planted, right? You can put data on a computer remotely. And, I think the modern answer to that is sort of containerizing data in clouds, right? So we've started to see a shift away from, like, data doesn't really live on your computer anymore. It lives in, AWS or whatever service you use, Microsoft Cloud or, whatever it is. And that has sort of been vaguely like an answer to, a computer isn't a safe place to have stuff anymore. So that's sort of where we've seen that shift. But in terms of privacy and user privacy, like, if you're using a company device, like, please do not do anything personal on that device. Like, you are setting yourself up for a bad time.
Well, and let's talk about the specifics there. Like, for example, even Microsoft now is building in something called Microsoft Recall, which had a really bad launch, but I believe it's now out there, that takes screenshots of your computer every few seconds and stores it for your benefit, supposedly, so you can help remember the things you've done. But I have to imagine that the company, and there's even a name for it, right? Bossware. That these things come pre-installed on your computer, that is potentially seeing everything you do and then reading all your messages. You might be using Signal, but it doesn't matter if they could see screenshots of what you're typing. They could see all the websites you go to, the emails you're typing, even if they're not breaking the encryption. They just can actually, you're at the endpoint. You can see
they're just looking.
The stuff pre-encryption.
And all of that stuff, Bossware, quote unquote, which is a great word for it, that's even before you get to the third-party stuff like keyloggers, right? I'm just logging what you're typing. So it doesn't even matter what app you're in, right? Or, activity monitors where they're saying, oh, how often you awake on Teams, right? How often are you moving your mouse around? So all of the stuff you just described, that's pre-third-party monitoring software. That's just the stuff that comes with the computer. And that's why I always try to preface, like, the computers are the Wild West here, right? There is no limit on what can be monitored on company equipment. So, yeah.
Well,
exactly right.
And there's one other thing that I'm not sure a lot of people are aware of, but it's another, as far as I'm aware, a very common practice, and certainly in big companies, is this notion of middle boxes and company certificates, where even your encrypted HTTPS communications can be monitored because the company, because it's already there, because it's their computer probably, have installed certificates in your certificate store, either in your browser or in your OS, depending on how it works, that basically says all your internet traffic is going to go through this box on our corporate network that allows them to sit in the middle of all of your encrypted communications. It pretends to be Google. It pretends to be Amazon. It pretends to be those things because it can, with this certificate installed, and lets them see into your encrypted traffic as well. Is that still a common practice?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. I think modern companies kind of shy away from like full packet inspection like that, just because it's definitely like not a thing of the past, but it's like if you imagine how companies were like, pre-COVID, where like, everyone's in the office and like, yeah, of course that stuff was being monitored. And look, half of the reason it was being monitored is so that like a company employee is not going to like a Russian gambling website and
sure.
Downloading some sort of like Trojan onto their computer.
Absolutely. I understand. Yes, absolutely.
Right. But it's not like you can just stop it there. Right.
Right,
You know what
exactly.
I mean? It exists. And so TLS inspection, secure browsing, HTTPS stuff, that's all, not only is it real, common practice, right? In most large enterprise environments, I think it would be unsafe to not monitor that stuff, because large enterprise environments, especially like Fortune, 500, are targets, right? So your employees are targets. So my sort of technical security brain, it's like, yeah, of course. So like, why wouldn't they?
All right, Jody. So what's the privacy angle on this? What's the flip side of this? As an employee, how should I understand that this could invade my privacy or be used against me or whatever?
I think it goes to what we were talking about before, which is the expectation of privacy. Yeah. And actually, I'm going to use my daughter as an example. So she's at school, middle school, and there are some students in her class who violated the rules of don't go on these types of sites. And so they then blocked the site. And unfortunately, it actually blocked sites that they really needed for schoolwork. So then students couldn't actually do schoolwork. And my daughter's answer is, I don't understand. I go and look up this really innocent type of sites. Why do these people need to go to those kinds of sites? I mean, this is a school computer. I don't understand. I'm at school. And I think that's kind of the same for an employee. You are at work. You have been given a work device. You are supposed to be working. There's some expectation, you know what, let's go to lunch. Let's see what the weather is. Let's see what the news is. There might be sites that are relevant for your job that you need to go and compare to competitors and things along those lines. There is, I think, it's a questionable balance where that life and work part kind of makes some sense. But it is a work device. They are paying you to do a job, not paying you to have a device for you to go do whatever else it is that you want to go and do on that device. And I think if people understand that part, let's just get back to basics. Like my daughter goes to school. She's supposed to know how to learn. You go to work because you're doing a job. And so we get into nuances and technicalities of laws that are here to try and protect you. But it's to try and protect you because people have pushed the envelope too far. So companies have had to go and also protect themselves from ensuring that the people there are doing what it is they've been hired to do, while also protecting their assets. And the company assets could be IP, could be trade secrets, could be code, could be personal information. I mean, there's a lot of information and assets that a company is designed to protect. I think individuals should remember what kind of device they have, why they've been hired, and if there were any monitoring, why is it being monitored? It's to ensure protection of company assets and ensuring people are doing what it is that they've been hired to do.
Yeah, absolutely. But I just also know that people are people, and especially like when you're working from home, and like COVID, I'm sure was a big thing. Like if you're in your home environment, you kind of psychologically feel like, yeah, I'm using my company laptop, but yeah, I do want to check the weather. I do want to trade a stock real quick, or I want to check the news, or I want to check my email. I want to check social media. And so I'm already on this computer. I want to do it here. I'm sitting at home and just I can understand why people just would naturally fail to think about that as they're doing those things.
And in my view, that's kind of on them because, again, you're on company equipment. If you choose to want to put it all together, but you knew that, maybe you had a company like Jan's that put it front and center, and I've seen many companies that have, this is what we do. If you remember that you had a handbook and policies that you have to adhere to, then when you choose to go look at your email or you choose to go whatever sites to visit, I think that's back on you.
So it's famously from Ghostbusters, don't cross the streams.
I mean, that's
good advice.
People might not like it, but at the same time, it's a work computer. Yeah. You are there to perform a job, and part of the job is to protect the company, as we've been talking about here. And because companies have pushed pretty deep, sometimes on purpose, sometimes not on purpose, we have some laws. Typically, laws come along as a reaction to where something went wrong, whether it's in privacy or anything. Just take it's like what we learned in kindergarten. So-and-so got up. Well, now there's a rule. You have to raise your hand. I mean, people do things, then you end up with rules. So in the privacy context, it's because someone pushed a little bit too far, and now we have to rein that in. But at the same time, it is a company, and you are there to perform whatever job it is you're there to perform. And that should be what people need to remember first.
It's like hair dryers all have the little tag on them say, don't use this in the bathtub. Yeah. Because somebody did it.
That's exactly right. I mean, you're in water. If you forgot science class, well, I guess now you're reminded all the time. So for the companies that want to remind you all the time, that's why they have it on the login screen. Otherwise, people just need to remember, when you go to do the thing in the day and then you get paid for it, you're supposed to be doing the thing you're getting paid for.
I like the idea of the banner, honestly. And I wish and what's one of the reasons I wanted to do this episode is I don't think a lot of people it's in their face. I don't think a lot of people are putting those things together, and I want to make sure they're aware. All right. So we've talked about mobile devices. We've talked about computers. There are still other ways that we might be tracked or monitored, or things that might feel creepy and could potentially be used for privacy invasive things. So let's talk about other things. Like, in a lot of big companies, you carry around a badge. That badge is a wireless badge. You tap it to get into places, but within a reasonable distance, you could read that badge from other devices as well without you actually physically tapping it. Oftentimes companies have cameras in the building or around the premises, and those cameras might today feasibly have facial recognition software running on them. I guess I also want to bring out the fact that a lot of people don't put this together is printers today are all networked, and they're all computers. In fact, a lot of companies have gotten bitten by this because they sell their printers on eBay, not realizing there's a hard drive in there that contains the last 3 months worth of documents that were printed. But by the same token, your company knows what's scanned and printed on those printers as well. It's not just like your printer at home. It's not a dumb device. It's a smart device. So I want people to understand, what are some other potential ways that your company, again, for perfectly valid reasons in most cases, what other ways might companies have information about you that you might not think about?
I would start with just validating the badge thing. Yeah, your badge is being tracked. Everywhere you go, it always is. In fact, here in DC, there's sort of this unspoken rule that if you're out at a social event, like after work, like a happy hour, and you have your badge out, if you're like a fellow govy, you tell them to put it away, right? Because it's just like a common courtesy thing within the security community, where it's just like, I can see your badge, right? When you're at a bar, because someone takes a picture of your badge. Now they have your badge number. Now they have your picture. They can recreate the badge. They can flash it friendly to get by security, whatever, yes. Right? We're almost talking like physical security at this point. But of course, every time you scan your badge, that location's tracked. And if you're a more sophisticated enterprise organization, you use that same badge to print, right? You use that same badge
that at Cisco, yep.
There you go. And so that piece of identifying information becomes that much more important. Printers, of course, yes, just out of pure necessity, we're tracking where every printer is and what it's being used for and who's using it, right? Like, that's definitely happening. One that maybe people don't think about is physical tokens. So in sort of an effort to beef up security and beef up different identifying factors, a lot of companies would introduce physical tokens. Like, if you're familiar with this is the RSA token, these little devices that you walk around with that, you either hold on your keychain or whatever it is, and they provide you a unique number or code in order to access resources at a specific moment in time. Those are also being tracked. So like, we correlate the information about like, hey, I'm at a restaurant and I just quickly needed to get on the VPN. So I whipped out my physical token and I entered that number. Well, of course, we see what number was generated. We see where it was generated. We see when it was generated. We can correlate that with an IP address by which you signed in via the VPN. We can say, oh, you were at a restaurant at 8 p.m., right? So anything that is providing some sort of in-the-moment unique piece of information could ostensibly be tracking, where you are, right? Who and what you're doing. I don't know if I have too many other sort of, fun examples of technologies that might be tracking you against your will. But
what about bringing a personal laptop to your home network? Is there any built-in monitoring software on my laptop that might be, looking around my local home network? Or we talked a little bit before about not crossing the streams, but it's not uncommon for people to have their own private Outlook accounts or their private Google accounts where your company uses Google Workspace, things that might get muddy.
I mean, definitely, right? I guess, so if you're on your company issued equipment on a personal network, the company is going to have a reasonable understanding of the network you're on. They're not going to be able to see everything, unless they're hacking your network, which is very unlikely. They're not going to be able to see the other devices on your personal network, but they're going to have basic information about your personal network, router, subnet, that sort of thing, right? Now, if you're going really deep into hacking and sort of black hat stuff, then yeah, I mean, if you're on your personal network is now exposed to someone looking around your personal network, right? But the chances of that being your company are extremely, extremely low.
Well, for the record, it went the other way too. Which was it? CrowdStrike? One of the major hacks was because somebody was on their home network and their Plex server was hacked, right? And then that exposed their company equipment to so it goes both ways.
Oh, definitely. I mean, yeah. Please go ahead.
I was just going to add, so for people who might be in a role that requires a car or has a company car or you're driving a company vehicle, location and GPS tracking is likely in there. And then this is where I think people do forget things. And if you take, let's say, your phone and you sync that to your car, you now have personal information in that company vehicle. Yeah.
And that's a good one.
It's a shared company vehicle, or now you're not in it anymore. You turn that in, you're on a new role. Well, your information is still in, as we all know, the computer, because cars are now just computers with some wheels.
Indeed.
That's a really cool example, actually. I love that example because that is actually how law enforcement finds people who steal cars. They see if they've paired their Bluetooth phone into the car's audio system, and they can use that to back trace and figure out who was in the car.
Because if you got a carjack, you need your tunes, right? Am I right?
I'm not going to steal in silence,
But also things like GPS. So I'm putting in your home address. I'm putting in wherever you're going. That can be a few things. One, it could be, did I take the company car and I'm going to all these other places other than where I'm supposed to be going for work? That's one. But I also just legitimately might put in what's the best route home because I'm taking my company car home and that's what I get to do. So remember all the pieces. Your tunes are one part, your text messages, your phone calls, any things that you've synced that might have a login experience. Some executives might even have certain apps that they've linked to their devices, but also the map part. So I think the car or just a vehicle is an interesting reminder. And some of those are shared and some of those are your personal one for however long you get to have that company car.
Well, and we've been talking about individuals, but I think Jan maybe mentioned this earlier or alluded to this. There's also correlation involved here too. So think of it also as company romances. Like I might, if both of you have a company issued phone or a company phone with MDM on it, I might know that you're both spending the night, interestingly, at a hotel very often, even though you're both married to someone else. Or if this is going through third parties, I could even see a service. Well, I want to alert you if your employees are spending an inordinate amount of time with some employees of another company, which they don't work yet. I can, I don't know, this is the tinfoil hat stuff, but I can envision from correlation also getting a lot of very personal information.
So correlation is extremely powerful because it's what you're doing is you're taking all the available data points and you're building a story out of it. So one of the most interesting examples of correlation I ever saw, and just mind you, this was pre-COVID. So this was before sort of the remote work revolution. Through a number of sort of web-based browsing, behavioral correlations, activity, and network stuff, the IT department of let's call them a friend's company was able to very accurately predict if an employee was looking for another job or taking interviews. And, he told me this story and I was like, but who, like, did you take that upon yourself to create that system? And he was like, yeah, I was curious. Right. He was like, I was the director of information technology and I wanted to get ahead of employees leaving. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Now, do I think that's like an easy system to create and correlate? No, I think that's actually pretty sophisticated. Right. But the fact that it could be done and the fact that it worked was both impressive and scary to me.
Well, all right, Jody, I'm curious if you know of any other cases where in the old days, if you didn't already know this, companies would often like pull your credit report before you would be considered for a job. And that was usually a one-time thing. And I'm not sure exactly what they're looking for other than maybe you're in a lot of debt. Certainly for government jobs and things like that, that could be a red flag. But now my understanding is that they just subscribe to this. Like they're constantly getting updates, or at least red flag updates, like something's changed negatively on Kerry's credit report and this might affect his performance or might make you worry about this employee. Or data brokers are probably offering these services as well to kind of like what you're talking about. Are they interviewing other jobs? Are they having personal problems? I don't know. My mind can go in a rat hole there. Are these things happening?
Well, I can only speak to companies that I have talked to, and I would say this is not a common practice that I personally see. The common practice that I see are your kind of traditional background reports and how extensive those might go. They might have a social security number type report. Depending on the kind of role, I have seen deeper credit like checks. So it might depend again on the kind of role or the access that you might have in the company. I think the piece that I would remind people, I have a reminder and then let me kind of close out my thoughts. So are there data brokers selling all kinds of information? Yes, I'm sure there are. I don't personally see this as an active area that companies are trying to sign up for all day long. I don't see that as a mainstream practice. Are there companies out there probably doing that? Yes. I just personally haven't come across them as this is what we do all day, every day type scenario. I do think that people need to remember their social media accounts. Now, there are a number of states where there are laws to protect people where a company can't ask for the login information because early on there were people actually asking for that. I don't know why you would feel the need to give your personal information out like in that regard. However, I do think people forget what they might have as private versus what they might have as public. And I do see people, even in the recruiting stage, oh, well, who is this person? And they might be going to LinkedIn in a professional context, but not just LinkedIn. They might go to Google. They might go to YouTube. They might go to pick your other flavor social media. And in that regard, they are gathering that information. And there are likely services that help you in that area. The companies I know, and I haven't seen them necessarily sign up for those services, but I'm sure those services exist today.
All right. So we need to wrap this up, I know. So I want to kind of combine a couple of questions here and look at the whole life cycle of your candidacy. So not only just as an employee, but before you're an employee, like as a prospective candidate for employment, and also after you leave the company under whatever grounds, either amicably or not. And then second, from on the back end, after you leave a company, and Jen, this is more for you. If I remove the MDM profiles and things from my devices, are they clean? Like, can I assume that I'm back to this is now purely Kerry's device? So let's start with the candidate part first.
So what I would say regarding candidate privacy is I think first, as a candidate, people should go and really read the privacy notice. There should be a candidate privacy notice. And if it is a regular privacy policy, there should be a section for candidates. Larger, more global companies often have their own dedicated candidate privacy notice. It doesn't have to be. It just has to be covered somewhere. If you read a privacy notice and it's old or you see nothing about candidate information, that might be a red flag.
Okay.
That company is asking for information that doesn't make sense. At the same time, there are federal laws about what they can and can't ask you and from a discrimination standpoint. So a variety of questions are often deemed as optional. And again, that is to ensure fairness across the board. I mentioned already the social media login, where companies can't be asking you for give me your actual login information so you, the employer, can go see whatever's behind kind of that closed experience. And I would impart, if you think that it seems like a lot of personal information that they are asking you in the process, to question that, to ask more information, because it really might be an employer who's just pushing the envelope and doesn't actually know what they can't be asking. Kind of like how
Sure.
years ago we were in the social media space and employers were asking for it. And some candidates felt, oh my gosh, I have to give it to you. But actually they ended up not really needing to do that, because when it comes to privacy in HR, there's this significant overlap that companies have to adhere to. There are federal laws, there are state laws, and in some places, depending on the job, there are local laws. When we go globally, I'd have to, as an employer, have a business purpose. I'd have to have a legal basis to be able to ask for that kind of information. It'd have to be incredibly reliant on the job. We talked about cars earlier. Well, I probably could run a driver's record type report if you're going to be driving a company car.
Sure.
Right. So, or if that makes some sense.
Right.
If I am a person sitting at a desk, you probably don't need my driver's record if I am a desk related job. So we were talking about correlation of data points. What is the ask and the type of data being received, and how does that connect and correlate to the type of job that is here? The starting point should be that candidate privacy notice. The next should be, what could they do with this information? Could they discriminate against me? And is there a law in place to potentially protect me for that? That's actually that's often not a privacy specific law. It's typically a HR specific law. And then just kind of is this right? Does this make sense?
Sure.
And that hesitation test is also, I think, very helpful.
All right. So real quick, let's pivot to the post-employment scenario. And I want to do this technical and legal. So first of all, Jan, can I clean my devices to the point where they're just like they were never there? And then maybe Jody, what information does a company keep, and could I ask them to delete it, for example?
Yeah, I'll start with the technical. You should. It'd be very rare, but you should be able to remove any MDM profiles that were installed on your device, unless you let them wipe your device when you first join the company, which please don't do that. But if you allow them to wipe your device, they can install a device profile that is non-removable.
Ooh, wow.
Right? So obviously, look, if you were letting the company wipe your device, you're already in a precarious situation in the first place. So I would really not do that. But that's sort of the point of doing that. So the reason you wipe devices is to install non-removable MDM profiles that persist even after wipes, even after restarts. 99% of the time, that's not going to be the case. You're going to install a user-initiated MDM enrollment or MAM enrollment, which requires your consent, and you have the ability to unenroll at any time. So as long as you do that after you leave a company, you should be relatively clean. There are other little sort of technical nuances you always want to check for. Ensure that you're not logged into any sort of cloud services with any sort of work identity, right? If they gave you a work number and like a dual eSIM, where they get that out of there, right? So you want to divest yourself of any sort of identifying information for your employee when you leave. MAM is a little more nebulous because MAM is when they're only managing the containerized applications. Ostensibly, they would have removed those when you leave the company. They cut off your access and those apps go away, but it may be on you to physically delete the apps from your device. So you may be the one that has to go and say, I don't want Outlook on here anymore. I don't want Teams on here anymore. Whatever. You should delete them. You really should, because those versions of the apps are being managed through an SDK on the back end. And so you should get rid of them when you leave a company. So uninstall the profiles, uninstall the work delivered apps, ensure that your work identity is not signed in anywhere on the device. You should be okay. It would be very difficult, to see otherwise.
All right, good.
Can I add something to that work identity piece? Because I think it ties to what we were talking about before in terms of expectations of privacy. If you go and create an account that isn't already work provided, and email makes some sense, and specific apps that you're already needing to do for your job at work, but you use your work email for other activities. Well, we have seen that people can come in tomorrow morning and everything is cut off. Your work email is not your personal email. We're going to take personal information outside the definition of GDPR here. That's not yours. It is a company provided email that you get to borrow while you're performing duties for the company. Do not have the expectation that I get to use that anywhere else. And you might immediately lose access to whatever you have signed up for. Even if you think it's professional related, you'll be in trouble.
All right. So what about my data? All the data that the company has collected on me over the years of my employment. When I leave, how long do they keep it? Could I ask them to delete it? It probably depends on what state I'm in.
It does depend on what state you're in. So again, in the United States, California is the only state that covers employees specifically. Globally, GDPR does, as well as across the world. It kind of depends on where you are. Jody in Georgia has no privacy rights as an employee of a company. However, in terms of keeping that data, again, I have to lean on my HR and legal obligations. It is typically 7+ years for them to keep all of that information. Statute of limitations might vary a little bit. And then if you were to, you do have rights. And so this is common, especially in California, again, in GDPR, where employees will go and ask for information. There are some exceptions of what it is that you can get. They can't actually delete every single piece of data about you because they need to have it for some of those HR and legal purposes. So yes, there are rights, but there's this interesting business real need that it can't all actually be deleted right away.
Well, the reason I bring it up is even though I fully understand those kind of responsibilities, I want people to understand that even if you never worked for a company, if you were a candidate for that company, oftentimes they've got information on you that can eventually leak. We've seen it happen multiple times in data breaches where the people who were affected were people who applied for jobs but didn't even work there. Similarly, after you've worked for a company, that data can still also be hacked and leaked and abused after you're gone, even though you no longer work there. And so I just wanted people to be aware that is an exposure.
It's happened to me. When I left my government job and I went to go work in the MDM space as a product, person, as soon as I resigned from job number 1 and started job number 2, I started to get unsolicited attempts at enrolling in unemployment. So someone got my information, or at least got the information enough to know that you've left this job, and they began filing for unemployment in my name. And the only reason we caught it was because, the DC government sent me a message. It's like, hey, we see you're trying to enroll in unemployment. I was like, no, I'm not. What is this? So absolutely, right? When you leave a job, like, it's not like they lock the gate and suddenly you're magically fully safe and that data is never going to be accessed. There's plenty of risk. And it's on you to sort of have those controls in place and understand how you're at risk for that stuff and be vigilant.
The other piece is a reminder of the kind of information you're providing. I have seen job applications where they're asking for social security number, and they don't need social security number to just have your application. Just because it's on the form doesn't mean you always have to provide it. Again, it kind of goes back to you taking control of the kind of information that you're providing. And along the way, it makes sense. When you actually are hired, then you can process the social security number for tax purposes and payroll, but you don't need it to know who I am.
Well, okay. All right. So that leads to my last question. And I always like to, wrap up with practical advice. But I know that in a lot of cases, you legally don't have to provide these things. But I think a lot of people, certainly if you're seeking a job or try to keep your job, they feel like they need to. Okay, the company can say, I can't legally ask you for this, but you know what? If you don't give me this or you're being kind of a pain about it, I'm going to remember that. Or as a candidate, you didn't fill out the form and someone doesn't know it's not legal and they're bugging you to fill it out. I know there's pressures, but all this to say, before we wrap up, what are your going away tips? What should we've already given some as we've gone along, but give me some more. What are some other tips that we should be aware of, things we should do to protect our data as an employee, to protect ourselves from harm or from being discriminated against potentially in an unfair way? And then if we feel that we have been, what recourse might we have?
I'll start with sort of the technical answer here. I mean, be aware of where your data is and what you're sharing. So many people just at a macro level are so blissfully unaware of where their data lives and what they're sharing with people, right? Best practice, please, have password managers, have randomized credentials, use the tools that were provided as a citizen, not even an employee. These are available to you and you should use them. And if you're not going to use them, I understand it can be a headache to, dive deeper into tech than maybe you're comfortable with. But at the very least, be aware of where your data is and what you're putting out there, because to your point, to Jody's point, it will be referenced. It will be referenced in interviews. It will be referenced when you leave. It will be referenced in, all sorts of unofficial ways, right? That are just like humans talking to humans while you're there. So be aware, be vigilant, and use the tools that are available to you.
I'm going to pick my favorite ones that I have talked about, but I'm just going to summarize them because I really like them, which is to read your privacy notice on the site that you're applying for. And if it's a teeny weeny little company, then ask them and ask, how are you managing this type of information? I've seen some companies ask for a lot of information in a Google Doc and put it in a Google Drive. That doesn't make any sense. So it's asking and having little antennas on your head to feel comfortable about what you're providing. So reading privacy notices that make sense, providing again that information that is required for the job, but when you're getting something and you feel like that might be a little bit too invasive, that is personal information, then to question it, because it very well is likely not required. And then I honestly think you are performing a job for a company. And personal should be on personal and company should be on company. And that really makes sense of, I think, helping people understand what could a company be monitoring and doing. The company is there to perform a service, to sell goods, and to protect their assets. You as an employee are there to perform a service, and to remember that distinction, I think, is really helpful as well.
All right, well, Jody, one more question, though. If I do feel that my information, that either they're collecting information they shouldn't be, or they're collecting information and using it in a way that is not legal, or, before, after, or during my employment at a company, what are my recourses? Like, do I go to my state attorney general? Most people probably would have no idea. Where would they seek help?
I would start with the company. I would start with contacting the company, whether that be their privacy office or the HR manager or the recruiting contact that you had. Depending on what the situation is, I would start with them. And then if you really feel like that answer didn't make any sense, if you're in a state that has rights like California, you can submit a complaint to Cal Privacy, who's the regulator, or the attorney general. You could do something similar to other attorney generals if you really feel like there was something egregious that actually happened. But I think starting with the company to better understand what's happening, or if you're a current employee, making sure you've read your handbook, because the employee handbook should be outlining and addressing what the company is able to be doing with your information.
And I think there's always benefit to just taking a good faith effort and giving your employee the benefit of the doubt the first time. Try it out, go through the regular channels, do what you're supposed to do first, and then failing that, then seeking like legal remedies. All right, guys, that was fantastic. We could have done this for 3 hours, and maybe that just means we'll have to have you back and do an extended version later. Jan, Jody, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having us.
Glad to be here.
I found that discussion very interesting, and I really believe that a lot of people don't fully grasp the level of surveillance they may be subject to just as being an employee for a company. And the fact that, honestly, it's kind of, you should almost expect it, because you really don't have any right to privacy when using company equipment on company time and within a company environment. They're paying you to do something for them, and that's it. That's what you're supposed to be doing. If you do anything else, it's their right to know what else you might be doing. Within some limits, obviously. We're human beings. You can't discriminate. There is some level of intrusion that I think would cross a legal line. But it's still good to understand what the situation is. All right, so I wanted to talk about a few more things before we go here. First of all, this whole risk management thing, that is definitely a thing. That's an industry term. I'm not sure how many employees are using third-party services to keep track on their employees, but these systems are being used on you in the real world. For example, maybe your bank, if you're a small business, might want to pay attention to the kind of things your business is getting involved with. They actually have rules of service that might say, we don't like what you're working on. In fact, we're going to talk about that quite a bit in my next interview, which is with Rainey Reitman from the Freedom of the Press Foundation, who wrote a book called Transaction Denied. But these sorts of tools, have real uses. Like, I can only imagine that sensitive government roles where you might have a security clearance, for example, or be otherwise exposed to some very sensitive materials would be, also subject to this sort of kind of continuous, if autonomous, monitoring for red flags. For example, excessive gambling or high amounts of personal debt, or basically anything that might make you a target for bribery or blackmail. I'll just tell you right now that every job recruiter or someone interviewing potential candidates will almost certainly do basic web searches about you as a candidate. looking for example, social media accounts. And I don't just mean like LinkedIn profiles or your profile on Indeed, but, personal accounts as well, like social media. Now, you might think you're smart and you've got these secondary accounts, kind of like a Finsta account or whatever back in the day, where you use a different name or a different handle and think that, oh, these things are separate. And over here where I'm not naming myself, I could, do all the things I really want to do. And then I'll keep these kind of pristine sock puppet accounts with my actual name on them. That's what I want the recruiters to see. But it's not that hard to correlate those two and figure out that they're the same person. And one of the ways that's often done is with a reverse image search. So if you post pictures of yourself with your face visible, for example, or worse yet, you post the exact same picture or photo, no matter what it is, on two different accounts, a reverse image search will connect those two things immediately. And then you've now been de-anonymized. Another thing, for example, that employers might want to monitor, I'm sure this is illegal to certain degrees, but they might want to find out if there's chatter with their employees about unionizing or going on strike if they're already a union. And, this could be couched as keeping track of employee satisfaction, but there have been real cases where employers have gone to pretty extraordinary lengths to try to squash a union activity. One more thing before we go. We didn't talk about this in the interview, but just like you shouldn't use company email addresses for personal accounts, we talked about that. I would also not use your company's password manager, or worse, your browser on your company device to hold personal credentials. And for legal reasons, you might not want to do the reverse either. That is, keep corporate secrets in your personal password manager. Like we say, don't cross the streams. Okay, so patrons, you will get some bonus Q&A as usual, including a pretty amazing story about location tracking in telecom companies that Jan will tell you about. We talk about some other interesting ways that you might be tracked or might be just leaving a digital trail as an employee that you might not be thinking about. And also just the kind of inherent danger in relying on, in a lot of these cases, on third-party tools and services to do this, because it creates basically a single point of failure for data breaches or possibly even security intrusions. So patrons, you will get that on Thursday as usual. Looking ahead, we've got news next week. I will have to file that news a little bit early because I'm going out of town next weekend. It'll come out on Monday as usual, but it will not cover everything up through, say, Friday or Saturday like it normally might. Then, as I said, we've got a great interview with Rainey Reitman. She just wrote the book Transaction Denied about debanking or financial censorship, you might call it. That was a very interesting discussion, and it's a great book. And then a little farther down the line, I just recorded a really interesting interview with Angel Maldonado. He's a very interesting person, and we had some very interesting discussions about AI and his company, Empathy. And I've got some other great interviews in the pipeline. So, hey, if you haven't already, subscribe, and then you won't miss any of that. All right, that's going to do it for this week. Take care, everybody. Stay safe out there. And until next time, as always, don't get caught with your garbage down.